everyone, my name is Justice Benson. Some of you know me as Justice O. This is a video slash podcast, whatever you want to call it, for Help Others Heal, which is a resource to try and help those that are looking for help, healing, or restoration in their lives, dealing with hurt. We're all hurt in different ways, but this particular video is about how to heal from church hurt, or advice on how to heal. And today, as a guest, and I hope I get to talk to him again because this is a real privilege, we have Dr. Soong Chan Rah. And Dr. Soong Chan Rah is very well known for his work on diversity within the church. And Dr. Soong Chan Rah, he's also a lecturer and a doctor and a professor. And please, could you mention the name of the university again for me, please?
Sure, North Park University in Chicago.
North Park University. Now, I'm based in London. You can hear my accent.
Just a little.
I sound a little bit American according to some, but I'm based in London and I'm still trying to get familiar with all the universities. But this man, just Google his name. Oh my word! That's why I'm just ecstatic right now. This is a dream. I sent a tweet to Dr. Soong, and for him to respond meant a lot. And I was like, wow, he actually responds. I'm not saying he's going to respond to all. I don't want everyone tweeting him now, but this is a real privilege. So welcome, Dr. Soong.
My pleasure.
Thanks. How are you today?
Very good, thanks. Good to be on with you.
Yeah? Oh, thanks, man. So, but just before we get onto the main question, like,
Sure.
What's your story? What's your background? So for those that may not know who you are, what's your story? What's your background?
Sure. Well, I've been teaching now at North Park Seminary, which is the part of North Park University, for 15 years. And before that, I was a pastor for about 17 years. So half of my life has been in pastoral ministry, working in the church as a pastor and as a minister. And then the other half has been in my career has been in the academic world. And so a lot of what I write about and a lot of what I try to do is kind of the intersection of the two. But I was born in Korea and actually came to the U.S. as an immigrant to the United States. And then I grew up in the U.S., first in kind of a rough neighborhood, in an inner city neighborhood in Baltimore. So I kind of grew up not in privilege, but as an immigrant family growing up in a poor neighborhood. And for my family, one of the best ways out of our kind of circumstances of poverty was actually education. And so a lot of that meant both in terms of the church and in terms of education, that was a place where I kind of found my calling, a place where I could express my who I am, and it's been in the context of the church and in the context of higher education.
Wow. And what's moved you to work more in the realm of, say, diversity within the church? Because I've seen a lot of content around race.
Yeah.
Also about the white evangelical church today.
Yeah.
What's pushed you into that side of things?
Sure. So when I was growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, it was an inner city neighborhood in Baltimore. All of us were poor. We had kind of poverty in common. I guess in the UK you would call it the estates, right? These kind of housing type projects where people would live together. But because we had poverty, although we had poverty in common, you would think that we would be able to kind of unite around our mutual suffering. But instead, my neighborhood, which was about a third Black, a third white, a third recent immigrants, mostly Korean, Asian immigrants, we didn't get along with each other. And I still am trying to figure out, why was that when we had this kind of common suffering together, yet we had these divisions along racial lines. And that was in the cafeteria, you saw divisions along racial lines. In junior high school, which is when I lived in that neighborhood, you saw these racial divisions. And of course, by the time you got to high school, you actually started having gangs that were divided along racial lines. So a lot of my life I've been trying to figure that out. Why is it that we can't seem to get along with each other when we do have certain things in common? And I think when I went into the church, and I said, well, at least in the church, we should have something in common. We have Jesus in common. We have our faith in common. Maybe in the world, poverty is not enough to bring us together. Our, challenging economic circumstances aren't enough to bring us together. But in the church, we should have our faith and our, there should be a life together as a community, as followers of Jesus. And I actually wasn't seeing that. I was actually seeing maybe even more division as the scripture says, the dividing walls of hostility I was seeing all over the place, maybe more in the church than even in the world.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason that I've kind of committed to working through some of these theological and ecclesial issues around racial division, and maybe moving towards what the Bible talks about, which is a wonderful coming together of different races. And we see
Yeah.
this in Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. And so that's been a lot of my research and my ministry and my kind of pursuit in terms of my reading and my writing, to say, how can we be a better church that actually crosses these dividing walls of hostility?
Yeah. And you must get a lot of flack for that, because, you know, I'm sure it's not always received well when you're actually going into, just saying, a predominantly white church, for example, and
Yeah,
then, you know, you hit them with what your thoughts are and what the scriptures actually say, because it's actually backed up,
yeah,
because
yeah.
they will know Christ by our love for one another.
Right, right.
I'm sure we've all got the YouVersion Bible app, and we see the daily
Sure,
Bible verse that says we should love one another.
sure.
So, do you get a lot of flack for that?
Yeah, and this is interesting to me because the pushback, I think, comes from when the communities, Christian communities, especially here in the U.S., and I would assume in other places as well, they have a way of doing things that gets so embedded into who they are,
Yeah.
right? And so within the white American evangelical Christian communities here in the U.S., they have embedded into their church narratives, ideas, worldviews, imagination, whatever language you want to use. They've embedded into who they are, their identity as American Christians, a certain way of thinking and doing things.
Hmm.
And so when that gets confronted, that oftentimes is rejected because, hey, wait a minute, that's not the way we do things around here. So, for example, when we say, well, maybe America isn't God's chosen promised land, many white Americans will say, what are you talking about? America's God's chosen people, and we're exceptional, make America great. You know, all of that language starts coming on. And so, hold on a second. Everything you just said about American greatness is not in the Bible.
Yeah.
It comes out of your kind of cultural assumptions, your sociological assumptions of American superiority, white American exceptionalism, make America great again. None of that is in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so when I bring biblical truths to confront these borderline heresies, you know, things that aren't in the Bible, things that people are kind of clinging to, that's when some of the pushback comes. And so for me, I don't feel bad about getting resistance because I feel I'm clinging to God's truth.
Amen.
And God's truth is that America is not the promised land. White Americans are not the new Israel or the new chosen people. None of that is in the Bible. And so when I bring that truth to say, okay, if that's not true, then let's actually live into the truth. And if that the truth is that God has made every single human being in his image,
Amen.
and there is a dignity and a value to every single person. And so for you to say this person is less valuable than me, to say Black America is less valuable, so we can imprison them at a higher percentage. Latina immigrants are less valuable, so we'll put them into prisons, children into prisons on the border. Asians are less valuable, and so we'll make fun of them by saying Kung Flu and Wuhan virus. All of that is heresy because it stands against the scripture, which dignifies to the value and worth of every human life and every person having that dignity. And so, you know, I feel confident in what I'm saying because I feel like I'm just speaking God's words, and the resistance is oftentimes, but we don't like what you're saying because America is beautiful, America is perfect, America is, you know, exceptional. And I'm saying, you know what? That's not in the Bible. If you're clinging to that, that's not on me, that's on you.
And that goes all the way back to Genesis, though, that we're all made in the image of God.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it's one of the first biblical theological tenets we encounter, that all of humanity is made in the image of God and has that dignity. In fact, it even precedes the doctrine of the fall, the doctrine of human anthropology, of who we are made in the image of God. That's actually one of the first theological doctrines that appear in scripture, the doctrine of creation. And then at the moment of creation, we see the doctrine of biblical anthropology. And then we get the doctrine of the fall. I'm not saying that they're in any kind of value system, but I'm saying that we can't ignore the doctrine of the image of God because it's very key to our theological formation very early on in the scripture.
Exactly, and I liked the way that you kind of described the cultural Christianity.
Yes.
Like, because over here in London, over in the UK now, I'm in my mid to late 20s. I won't say my exact age for whoever's watching. That's a mystery. But I've been a Christian 13 years,
Yeah.
and yeah, there are some churches that you go to. If there's no teas and coffees, there's a riot.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
After service, like, oh gosh, there's no tea and coffee. Oh, why am I here? I think in the Western UK London context as well, I can say that's the same thing.
Yeah.
Because there's this element of, but I would say over here it's more subtle in my opinion.
Sure.
There's a lot more subtle racism here. Oh, sorry.
Mm.
Sorry. There's way more subtle racism. Cultural Christianity is very subtle over here.
Yes.
And do you know? And the reason why I know this is because I used to be one myself.
Mm.
And I think from when I joined the faith, that's when I was really relying on the Lord. But as I got into serving,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt a shift within me where it's like, okay, I'm more process driven than purpose
Sure.
driven, if that
Sure.
makes sense. And
Yeah.
then by
Yeah.
being process driven, that was like a vehicle for me to make sure that there's always teas and coffees and biscuits after church, and to
Mm.
make sure that my fellow white brethren are super comfortable. So I'm gonna
Yes.
smile a lot.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with smiling. Like, psychologically speaking, smiling has its benefits. Actually, it helps
Yes.
trigger the happy hormones within you. But if you're just smiling like, yee,
Yeah.
yeah, hey
Yeah.
guys, are you comfortable with me?
Yeah.
And that's how I unconsciously, that's how I felt.
Yeah.
Because once I stepped out of that arena, and then God had to literally uh, put a break on my life, and help me to self-reflect, and uh, yeah, literally the power of the Holy Spirit had to really, really do a lot of work in me. That's when
Yeah.
I started to realize that, wait a minute, some of these things that we're fighting over, some of these things that we're doing, and
Yeah.
even the way I was acting, I didn't need to do it. Because if we're claiming to be Christ-like Christians,
Right.
Spirit-filled Christians, then I don't have to put on a facade to make
Yes.
me comfortable.
Yeah, that's a good description. The facade. I could even use the language as performance, right?
Mm.
So, if you are walking into a play, or kind of entertainment production, or some kind of television show, and you're asked to play a character, you have to perform in that character that's appropriate for that setting, right? I mean, it makes sense, right? But for many of us, we're asked to perform in a way that is not who we are,
Yeah,
right? And that's what you were doing, right? You're walking into a story that's already been scripted out,
yep,
and it doesn't include you. So you have to play a certain role to fit into that storyline.
yep,
Now, the difficult part of that, or the harmful part of that, is that it's not God's story. It's the story of a particular people group,
yep,
or it's the story of a particular church tradition.
yeah.
And what we want to do as Christians is to be in part of God's story. Be a part of what God is doing in the world, not what a group of people at a church decide should be done in the world.
Yeah.
And so, your frustration, very expected, and almost appreciated that kind of frustration,
No.
because you're right in that frustration. You shouldn't have to be what other people expect you to be. You should be what God expects you to be, and you
Amen.
should be and fulfill what God has anticipated you to be, and the fullness of what God has planned for you to be. But so many people, I think, end up frustrated with church because they're going into a preset, scripted storyline that doesn't include them unless they act a certain way that
Yeah.
makes them fit in. And that, again, is kind of an affront to the fact that we're made in the image of God, and that we are not performing for each other. Our performance is actually to God. Our audience is God. And oftentimes, I think in church, we end up performing for the leaders of that church or for others in the church, rather than and saying, this is my act of worship to God.
Mm. And do you think, I'm really, oh man, I know this is a short interview, but do you think that Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, do you think that there'll be a shift over time, especially after this whole COVID
Hmm.
period and remote lifestyle periods? Do you think there might be more of a shift where the Black Asian minority ethnic group within a church structure or culture, as you call it, there might be a shift there where some people may feel, do you know what, I don't need to smile, or I don't need to act in a certain way to make you comfortable. Do you think there'll be more of them shifting to churches that are more BAME led, or people of color led? I think that's the American term.
Yeah, yeah. I think what we're seeing is what you were describing, which is the frustration, right? And the truth is, this frustration has been voiced for quite some time now. This isn't like coming out of nowhere.
Yeah.
People of color, ethnic minorities, have been frustrated for years that we are operating under a script that is not the biblical script; it's the script of the dominant culture.
Yeah.
And so these voices have been rising up for several decades now within the Western context in particular. And there's a lot more books on it than there were 40 years ago. 40 years ago, there were no books about this. Now you see a lot more writing about the frustration of Christians. Saying, in the church, why are our voices suppressed? Why are our perspectives and our understanding of who God is, why is that always considered to be less than, or less appreciated, or less intellectual, or less significant than the dominant culture voices? And so these voices are starting to rise up. I think what we're beginning to see is that there's so much of this that's been kind of pressed down for years and years. And you can only keep that pressure down for a certain number of time, right? Yeah. It's like boiling a pot of water. You keep a lid on it. At some point, that lid is going to blow. Yeah. And so because a lot of these expressions of frustrations have not been given outlet, and it's been suppressed, where the dominant culture says, oh, no, Black folk, go over there and you do your own thing, and we'll just ignore you, but you don't come over here and do your thing. Or yeah. Asians, you go over there and do your thing, but, you don't have anything to say to the majority culture. You can publish and speak to at an African-American conference, but not at the majority culture conference.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
And so these kinds of, or you can speak at that urban ministry conference over there and speak on prayer ministry for Koreans over there, but you're not allowed to be the voice center.
Yeah.
And so you can only suppress that for a certain amount of time when things begin to need an outlet, and especially frustration needing an outlet. And I think it's to the credit of minority and African-American and people of color that we're not necessarily letting it come out in anger. A lot of it is coming out in love, which I think is pretty incredible. Here in the U.S., the fact that after 400 plus years of oppression and suppression, so many African Americans are still reaching out a hand of love is pretty phenomenal. That after hundreds and hundreds of years of oppressive history, we are still finding the Black church, we're still finding African American Christians reaching out, saying, let's actually continue to work and serve alongside each other because because of Christ. And so that's where I think the hope is for the church, where we're not governed by just our anger, we're also governed by the grace of Christ that has saved us, and the grace of God that has saved us. And I'm very thankful for so many who have every right to blow the lid off of this thing, but are actually reaching out a hand of grace and reaching a hand across and saying, let's work on this together.
But that's exactly what Christ, that's being Christ-like to me. Yeah. Because if you look at the story of Zacchaeus as well, Zacchaeus was like a rich man. He was known for frauding people, overtaxing people, and the people around him, then they hated Zacchaeus. But Jesus looked past everyone and he went towards the socially rejected.
That's right. That's
right. And he formed a relationship with that socially rejected person, and then we see a life transformation. And to me, that just screams love, because you're looking past what everyone else thinks. You're looking past everything, and you're like, do you know what? There is a goal, there is a mission, and that screams Christ. And as you said, I'm very happy that people of color, or BAME, whatever you want to call him, I call myself Mr. Chocolate. You know what I mean? Like, that's just me right there. I'm Nigerian. I'm British, but I'm born here. But obviously my heritage is Nigerian. But yeah, man, like, it hurts though. It hurts, and it's not easy to do it. It hurts. Like, you see either microaggressions or you see unconscious bias. And as a person of color, it's like, do you know what? I see that, but the Great Commission, like, how can I? And that leads to the question of, how can I look past the hurt?
Yes, and that's where I think, for me, in traveling in these multicultural, multi-ethnic circles, and traveling in kind of majority culture circles,
Mm.
um, there's a lot of kind of what you're describing, not just microaggressions, but just kind of the consistent, persistent level of not just slights, but actual both aggressive and passive aggressive actions
Yeah,
towards people of color in these majority culture settings.
yeah,
And it takes longer, but bleeding out by 1,000 cuts is just as bad as bleeding out by one massive cut,
yeah, yeah,
and so, it's just more painful. It just lingers longer to be in
yeah.
that kind of setting. And so that's why it can be very painful. And again, I do want to honor and lift up, my brothers and sisters who have said, I'm staying in this. And
Mm,
I'm staying in this because of the love of Christ. I'm staying
mm,
in this because Christ compels me to love my brother and sister, even when they are hurting me.
yeah,
And so I'm totally with you on. It gets tiring though, and
yeah.
that's why sometimes it's good to encourage one another in
Amen.
this process,
Amen.
to say, because sometimes people who are in charge, people who have
Mm,
authority, or people who are maybe the ones who kind of are the ones in power over this, they don't quite get what it's like to be not in power
yeah,
and to constantly have to deal with that oppression of power over them.
yeah,
But when we talk to each other, we say, and even like those who've been hurt by the church, when those who've been hurt by the church talk to each other, there's a real healing that could happen there, right?
amen.
Because you're acknowledging the pain that one has endured. I mean, that's one of the things about, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I do know that when there's trauma, one of the best things to be able to do is to walk through that trauma,
Yeah,
with others who've experienced that. That's why AA groups and recovery groups are so powerful, because
yeah,
you're walking through that together. And I
yeah,
think there's something to be said about people of color who have been hurt, who've had multiple microaggressions lashed against them, to
mm,
be able to get together and say, hey, that wasn't right what happened.
yeah.
And not to have someone say, "Oh, we didn't mean that," or "Oh, oh,
I
that's
didn't
not."
know.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
I
you
didn't
didn't
know.
say
Right?
so. You
That's
didn't.
right. That's
You should have
right.
spelt it out to me and put it on a
That's
card.
right. And that wasn't my intention. I didn't mean to say that. Or, some of these apologies that I'm seeing right now of
Oh
like,
gosh.
oh, I'm sorry for what I said if it hurt you, that
Yeah,
kind of stuff. After a while, it's like, okay, I've heard that over and over again.
yeah.
But to be able to talk to someone else who's experienced the same thing and said, oh, yeah, that you
Mm,
were hurt.
mm,
Oh, yeah, you deserve to be angry. Oh, yeah, you have every right to be upset.
yeah,
That's therapeutic.
yeah.
And I
And
think that works with like those who've been hurt by the church, but also in terms of the church did me wrong, but also those of us who've been trying to stay in this
yeah,
fight and ended up constantly having some kind of microaggression, some kind of passive aggressive action taken against us, and it does add up after a while. And so
yeah,
it helps to know when we talk to each other, okay, we're not crazy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not making this up. This is actually happening to me.
When I was going through her, and I wrote a little mini article about this, but there was that
Mhm.
one guy, this one preacher. I didn't want to speak to him at all because he came to speak at this
Yeah.
church I was attending or visiting at the time, and I just had enough of church at the time. I wanted to sit at the back. I just wanted to talk to the people that I already know and then go home. I'm not there for community. But this guy,
Mm.
he came towards me and he's like, "Oh, so how you doing?" And all I could think about in my head was, I know what this is gonna be like, and if I'm here another X years, I'm gonna go through the same hurt.
Yeah.
But that was my fault. I shouldn't have judged someone like that, and I shouldn't have
Yeah.
had this unconscious bias. But meeting with him and talking with him, um, it was therapeutic. It
Yeah.
was like, because you take it all in, and you either don't know who to go to, or you can't
Mm-hmm.
find the resource to help you. Then you just take it
Mm-hmm.
all in. But
Mm-hmm.
if you actually have someone to not say, all right, there's purpose, greatness, and restoration and healing, go there.
Yes.
But they're
Yes.
actually talking, which is like they're walking you through a
Yes.
process, and
Yes.
that's what helped me. And by God's grace, that's what. This is why I'm thankful that you have actually Dr. Soong Chan Rah, is talking to someone like me that has no, I've only got a HR qualification next to my name, but but someone like me that is not on, respectfully, on your level, because like I've seen your work on YouTube, I've seen your books, and the person that helped me read your books anyway.
Huh.
So this, I'm just blown away.
Well, you know what?
Really
We're
blown
all on
away.
this journey together. We all have our weaknesses. We all have our pitfalls, and we're all human. And this is a big part of my theology that before we jump to, hey, we're saved and redeemed, which we are. I mean, I have no doubt about that. We've got to know how broken and human we really are, and we are saved and redeemed. But that doesn't mean our brokenness at this moment, this side of heaven, is completely taken care of.
Yeah.
And so to recognize our humanity, and this is part of our theology of Christology as well,
Yeah.
that Jesus was fully divine, but he was also fully human. And so we need to cling to not only the kind of the divine aspects of Jesus, his purity, his holiness, his unfailing love, but there's some also human sides that we also have to recognize about our existence here on earth.
Yeah.
And that one, we're made in the image of God, and that image for me means that I am fully Korean and I can be fully human and I can be fully a follower of Jesus as a Korean American. That I don't have to put that aside. I don't have to check that. I don't have to, say, oh, your culture is not important. No, this is the way God has made me. And so to embrace that, and also my humanity, to say, yeah, there are weaknesses and there are things that I am incapable of doing because of my humanity. But I am also looking forward to when there is the fullness of renewal. So when we talk, and as pastors or as leaders or as an HR person to a professor, none of that really is as critical to me as we get to find the dignity of God in each other. We get to experience and rejoice in the human dignity and the image of God that we see in the other. And so thank you for the work you're doing, because you're calling people to restore that image of God and find that and see that in others.
Thanks, man. But it's only because there's a saying that I thought about some weeks ago, which is turn that hurt into healing for someone else. I probably heard it from a movie, but I'm going to claim it as mine. But turn that hurt into healing for someone else. And I'm beyond thankful that a man of your stature has spared some time with me right now. And I don't know who's going to see this or watch this. I know a few people that have already asked for the recording. But like, I'm saying this clearly, behold what a humble beast looks like. Because it speaks volumes of who you are. So thank you so much, Dr. Soong Chan Rah. Thank you. That we can actually talk like this, and I hope to catch up with you again. I hope this is
absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's two pastors that are friends of mine. They're Korean and actually go to their church, and the other pastor's a Black American as well. So, and also the guy that helped me. I would love to share the information with you, because like these guys are cool, man.
Sounds good.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. And also, could you let everyone know what your latest work is and where they can find you? And
sure. I'm on Facebook. I do have a personal page that's maxed out, but I do have an author page that you can follow, and I post some of my musings on that. You can follow me at Twitter, at Prof. Rah, Profrah. My latest book is right behind me there. It's called Unsettling Truths, and it was co-authored by with a native Navajo activist, Mark Charles, and he and I wrote this book together about the way that a warped theological imagination has shaped particularly American history and Western history in a way that has particularly damaged Native bodies and Native lives. So that's Unsettling Truth. It just came out last year, and so that's a book that examines the theological historical roots of racism, but does it through the lens of looking at the ways it's been oppressive towards Native Americans.
Wow, Unsettling Truths. I felt a little bit unsettled there. I'm gonna go and order that. I can get that on Amazon or any other outlet.
Yes. Okay. Amazon. It's on University Press is the publisher.
Awesome. Dr. Soong Chan Rah, thank you for sparing time with me, and I wish you well, and I hope we can speak again.
Thank you, Justice. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take care.